Now, when we have this stored in our Proclib, then what we would do is we would have the same things coded, except now, instead of being in stream in our JCL, it would be stored in a procedure library that we could invoke in the same way. And in the same fashion as what we just saw with our in-stream proc, now when we execute it, that proc is going to be brought in and expanded and syntax checked. There can be multiple procedure libraries, and these are concatenated by JES2. And as JES2 is the job entry subsystem, this is where all of the JCL passes through for syntax checking to ensure that everything is spelled properly, or if we have any errors or anything like that, they can be detected at that point before execution begins. We also have the ability to use another JCL statement called the JCL lib, which allows us to specifically direct our Proclib search to libraries of our own choosing. That way, if we have a library that is not part of our normal JES2 Proclib concatenation, we can direct the search for that particular library. And as a result, one of the things we'll be able to do then is we can control which Proclibs we want these procs pulled out of. Again, this is normally done like when you're testing or when you need to point to a library that is not part of the system setup or part of the system's defaults. Then you can direct it to your own personal libraries, for example, and test in that fashion without requiring security authorization to update or access libraries that you may not normally be authorized to change. In this example here, this is a proc that is stored in a proc library. And you can see in this case here, the proc statement marking the beginning of this, and then we have all of our various execute and DD statements that actually make up the JCL that we intend to run. So this is the way it would be stored in the library itself. And when we want to run this, what we're going to see then is we would execute the name of the proc, which is ASMACLG. And now you can see that the expansion substitutes an X for the slash to indicate that this is now an expanded proc that was read in from a proc library. And again, you can see the JCL itself is exactly the same interpretation, except that now, instead of having it defined in stream, it was simply read in from that proc library, expanded, and now we can see the JCL that we called in for execution. The JCL lib statement, as I said before, can be used to direct that Proclib search to libraries of your own choosing. So the order statement, for example, is intended to allow you to specify a library that you want used to resolve any proc that you might execute. The JCL lib statement has to be coded after the job statement, but before you execute any other JCL. So before any other JCL statements like execute statements or anything else occur, that would be where the JCL lib statement is going to be coded. Because that's going to direct the system as to which libraries you want to search for any JCL procs that you encounter in the rest of your job. Here's an example of using the JCL lib. And in this case here, you can see the job statement that we have. Then you can see statement 2 is the JCL lib statement, and the order indicating that we are going to search a library called gatom2.jcl.control. And then we execute this proc called genproc. And you can see again the X's indicate the expansion of that particular proc, and down at the bottom you can even see the message indicating that genproc was expanded using that particular library. So we get a status returned indicating the library that was used to resolve that proc that we invoked. So when we go to execute a proc, as I said, what we would use is we would use the execute statement just like we looked at in an earlier module, except that instead of invoking a program name, now we're invoking a proc name. And that can be specified as either a proc equals or by just specifying a name. In both cases, they are going to be interpreted as a JCL procedure that we are invoking rather than a program. And in addition, just as we saw in the other uses of the execute, we may pass parameters or code parameters that would be pertinent to that particular proc that we are coding. So, as we said, the JCL procedures then are going to be invoked from the execute statement, and another place where we can invoke them is on an actual operator start command. So in other words, when an operator issues a start at the system console for a particular unit of work, what they are really doing is invoking a proc. And as a result, when they invoke that, that will run in the same way as if we had submitted that from TSO.